Firstly, welcome to this webinar on accelerating the mobile payment space in Indo Swedish knowledge transaction. My name is Anna Sunderbergsen. I am a trade investor advisor at Business Sweden in New Delhi, India, and I will be assisting throughout this webinar. We're covering two markets that both have very interesting growth journeys. India obviously rapidly moving towards a more digital mobile payment society, and Sweden moving towards a more and more cashless country, one of the most cashless countries in the world, actually. So what learnings can really be drawn from these two? And that's really the purpose of this webinar, to explore this further. We have some esteemed speakers joining a panel from both Sweden and India, where we have Kunal Kalawatia, CMO at National Payment Corporation of India, NPCI. We have Upasana Taku, co-founder at MobiKwik. We have Joseph Hajj, CSO at Swish. And we have Cronholm, Chief Technology Officer at Crunchfish, as well as Rahul Misra, Senior Product Manager at Business Sweden in India. So a very warm welcome to all of you. We will soon get to know you and your organizations better in a mere moment. So throughout the webinar, to the audience, please do feel free to ask questions in the chat function. We will do our very best to answer them throughout. This webinar will also be recorded and made available after the webinar. And actually, without further ado, let's go right ahead and get a first glimpse of the background of the two markets, of the two journeys that we are investigating or looking into together today. So with that, I welcome Anders Wickberg, Swedish Trade and Invest Commissioner at Business Sweden in India, to give us some opening remarks. Anders, over to you.
Thank you, Anna, and I hope you can hear me well. And it will be very interesting to listen to all of you, and I look very much forward to the discussions. And like Anna mentioned here, although two, of course, completely different markets and contexts, we do share a similar journey in terms of digitizing our economies at a rapid pace. So I'm Anders Wickberg, and I'm Trade and Invest Commissioner, as mentioned, and I head our operations in India, and we're proud to work with Crunchfish in India to penetrate that market. We're also responsible from Delhi and Bangalore offices for South Asia. So what I said in terms of sharing a growth within the digital space and digital economies, of course, for those of you in India, you can see this live and every day. And in many aspects, India is actually leapfrogging years of development in other countries, including Sweden. In terms of the drivers, what we can see here, of course, is that the government initiatives, we had a demonetization process back in 2016, and the e-commerce and other rapid developments are, of course, even more triggering the space in terms of the cashless payments. We also have, from a more infrastructure perspective, the launch of a UPI, or a Unified Payment Interfaces, a couple of years back, which has, of course, enabled this to grow and prosper as well. So looking much forward to hear more from the esteemed panelists on that. I have, although I'm beginning to be a bit old myself, I do appreciate and utilize some of the upcoming Indian actors, such as Paytm, PhoneMe, and MobiKwik, as well as my iPhone on an everyday basis. And this is, of course, a trend that has been going on for some years. Now, with the Corona and COVID pandemic spreading throughout the world, and of course influencing India as well, we just expect that this will continue to accelerate and actually explode in sense for various reasons, and of course also the risk of spread being one, actually, that motivates more cashless interactions in general, and touchless interactions in general as well. So in Sweden, for those of you who are, most of you might be familiar with that market, but we have seen this trend many years ago. 10 years ago, we had close to 40% of all our transactions being cash-based. That's down to less than 10% today. So many of us never carry around bills in our wallets anymore. And besides Crunchfish, we of course see some of the large fintech players such as Klarna, Settle, and Swish having tremendous success in this market from the market also expanding to other countries. So and we also, like Anna mentioned, have a large number of average number of transactions per capita in terms of cashless. I think only parts of Eastern Asia succeeding there, Korea, Singapore being examples where this has begun rapidly. So and the trend also here in Sweden, of course, in terms of touchless interactions due to Corona as well, we can only expect this to be even more topical because of that. So I just wanted to, on behalf of Team Sweden, which is Business Sweden, the embassy, and everyone else supporting Crunchfish and others here in India and South Asia and throughout the world, welcome you on our behalf, and just underline that we look much forward to this knowledge transfer and discussions. So,
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anders, for helping us get a first idea of the two markets. Now, to actually guide us through a little bit deeper to the discussion, I'm happy to welcome our moderator, Joachim Samuelsson, CEO at Crunchfish, to guide us through it. Please, Joachim, the virtual is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Anders. Thank you, Anna. And thank you all panelists for joining this webinar. I hope we will have a very dynamic discussion. Please, a warm welcome to all the audience as well. And the dynamic discussion will be created by, I'll try to have some questions, but you're more than welcome to ask questions in between yourselves. And audience as well are also please send in questions, and we will try to do them as well in the meeting. So it's a live show. We'll do our best to try to highlight what are the similarities and what are the differences between these two markets. And to start with that, I'd like to dig in a little bit deeper about the characteristics of the Indian and the Swedish market, taking on from where Anders sort of left us here. And mobile payments are really successful in both markets. And I'd like to ask you, Rahul, from Business Sweden, sitting in Delhi, 45 degrees, steaming hot, but you are working for Business Sweden, so you have sort of a perspective on both markets. And could you just sort of give us a little bit of, continue on what Anders is saying, on a little bit of a background on where you see the two markets, please?
Thanks, Joachim. That's a great question, and that's something we do face almost on a daily basis. And how do you compare Sweden and India? Picking up from where Anders said, there is a lot of similarities between Sweden and India. Both are vibrant, thriving democracies with very vociferous consumers demanding very strong consumer rights. So that's where there are very strong similarities in both the places. But that's where some of the differences also crop up, because India and Sweden, from a mobile payments journey point of view, are at a different starting points. Sweden, 85% credit card transactions, and with remaining digital payments covering with less than 1% of the GDP in cash. So you can really see that the consumers are very well trained in handling mobile payments and credit card transactions. While India, no matter how many artificial events or phenomena happen, cash is still the king. India is very much cash dependent. So the journey or the leap which Anders was talking about is from a cash to mobile payment, while bypassing the entire credit card and debit card revolution, which India missed probably for whatever reason, because of poor products or poor policy or other aspects. So we're starting at different journeys. The consumers who will be accepting this are at a different mindset altogether. But going forward, we see a lot of convergence happening between India and Sweden, and that's where Sweden has a lot to offer in terms of learning. Going ahead also in terms of transparency and trust, and why is India still cash? Because in India, the economy is majorly split into formal and informal economy. Most of the informal economy is still cash driven. And the reason why the informal economy still is cash driven, and by informal economy, I mean this kirana stores, the cobblers, the one on the street vendors, because probably one of the reasons is they lack trust on the digital infrastructure, the IT infrastructure which is present around. Trust in terms of either the transaction going through, reflecting. So that amount of trust which a normal note in the hand which gives them is probably in a perceived way, the digital transaction or the credit card transaction has not been able to create a space. But probably that will change, and that will change through probably this COVID or demonetization, which had a fill up. But that's where the trust factor is a major factor which is stopping India from moving ahead. But on the contrary, Sweden, which has a centralized system in terms of Bankida and one system which manages all the vulnerabilities of that IT system also exist. So vulnerabilities in actually taking the leap ahead and moving into a digitized environment is a very real and apparent factor fear with most of the consumers. Unless it is clearly unsaid by either private players or from policymakers, and how to address IT vulnerabilities or digital vulnerabilities in terms of patchy network or frauds or cyber frauds. This will be a problem going ahead in terms of actually adopting consumer mobile payments. From a differences point of view, maybe the third one, which again comes to my mind, is how India is going in towards mobile payments in a very democratic, in a federated manner, where United UPI is one of the example, which has 120 plus apps on it. While Sweden took an early plunge because they were the first movers, the banks which came together with the centralized monopolistic bank ID, Bankida system, which is secure, but again very restrictive in terms of getting new applications or new kind of services on board. Two different journeys. So Bankida has its own limitations because it's now managed by few conglomerates and does not promote innovations the way UPI can promote innovation. So two different journeys in both, and in fact over here Sweden can learn from India in that aspect on how to get new players on board. And it's clear one thing which India market really appreciates is the pricing factor. UPI going forward has made it really cost effective to do a transaction, while Sweden on the contrary, Swish is more expensive to run a transaction compared to credit card. So not sure why, but that could be a good reason why two different journeys are two different stark contrasts. But going ahead with the post-COVID environment, with the touchless phenomena going ahead, I see there's a lot of convergence. So probably a COVID phenomenon outbreak is one of the reasons why we should be discussing this topic, and why mobile payments would be the future way of actually doing transaction, and cash would be on the way out. That's where I see the major differences, and probably I would love to hear other people panel view, and probably you'll let me know whether this is anything which you've heard differently. But these are my 4 points which I can think is majorly different between India and Sweden.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul, for that as a backdrop. And I'm sure we will come back to many of those issues going forward here. And I'd like to continue. We're going to NPCI. We talked about UPI as a great success. And I think it's important for everybody, certainly here in Sweden, to understand what UPI is. It's been a great success. 1.3 billion transactions has been transferred over UPI in December alone last year. I'd like to turn myself to Kunal here from NPCI. Could you explain a little bit on what sort of makes UPI such a success, and what is UPI, and maybe a little bit also for particularly the Swedish audience, what is NPCI? What kind of organization do you represent? If you could help us with that, please.
Thanks, Joachim. I think I'm Kunal here. I represent the marketing function of NPCI. I think our key task here is to increase users, enable merchants, and activate the consumers when they are on the platform. I represent NPCI here. I think the key role that NPCI plays, I think it's the backbone of the retail payments in the country. Most retail payment products are supported by NPCI, whether it's UPI, like you spoke about, RuPay, Aadhaar, NACH. So there's a host of product which allows retail payment transactions to happen, right from a B2C transaction to a C2B government payments. So I think there's a host of retail payment services, and NPCI is the backbone for it. The mission that NPCI runs is to touch every Indian or every citizen with one payment digital product in the journey that we are on. We are halfway there, I think, between our mobile-based product, which is UPI, card-based, which is RuPay, and the biometric payments. What we've been able to cover till now is a journey which is almost half there. Out of 1.3 billion population, half the population, we believe, we've touched with one of our products. So that's where we are. And I think the journey is still on. I think this is another half to cover very clearly. I think coming back to the question that Joachim, you had about UPI, I think before that we want to possibly look at the digital payments landscape of the country. I think in the last 5 years, when you look at how the digital payments have grown from 3 billion digital payments in 2014 to almost 41 billion digital transactions in this financial year 1920. There's almost a plus of 10x growth on digital payments. And somewhere that's where the DNA of the success of UPI also sits in within this. Very, very clearly, I think the vision of the policymakers, the regulator and the government very clearly sits into this. They've created a larger environment which allows for this growth. Coming specifically to the product, UPI, I think there are two clear aspects to this. One is the consumer experience, which becomes consumer readiness, and the consumer experience becomes one essential part of it. And I think the second important part is the ecosystem partners. Now, when you look at the consumer experience and the acceptance, I think there is a huge base of smartphone customers, which has been galloping every year. From 230 million in 2015 to almost 425 million smartphone consumers as we speak today. I think that's the pace which is allowing the customer readiness, or a customer being available with a smartphone and a bank account. So that's a huge infrastructure to work on very clearly. UPI by the product itself has created a great customer experience. It's a very simple product to use. You need a bank account, you need a smartphone, and I think you can create a UPI ID. The UPI ID, you could possibly imagine it like your email ID, or just possibly your way to address yourself. So you can actually have something like Joachim @UPI, or even you can have Mary's father, or something else what you like, or a cool dude @UPI, and that idea is completely devoid of any banking / financial data. And you can very easily share this with everyone, and transaction is very simple. You just need an UPI ID to send money, and the PIN to possibly obviously authenticate the transaction. But if you were to receive money, I think the only information you have to give out is your UPI ID, and that makes it really, really simple for customers to use. So I think that's one big part. The second important aspect of this is the ecosystem partners. I think I think in the larger context, you hear a conversation around banks against fintechs. But I would say in the case of UPI, it's actually banks with fintechs. Both these forces have come together. The banking infrastructure, which was ready, and I think the fintech ecosystem, which was ready to create new use cases, innovate, and go back with new products to the customer, is a crazy combination. So I think I would say in my mind, the success of UPI is the customer experience the product offers, the ease that the product offers, and the power of ecosystem partners and the banks together.
Thank you. Thank you for a good introduction here. And I'd like to stay at India a little bit and introduce you, Upasana, to the conversation, because you're one of the service providers having more than 100 million users in your wallet service. Could you tell us a little bit on how do you compete with all these other players, and how what are the ways for you to make money in this highly competitive market of India, which must be probably the most competitive market in the world at the moment, with 120 sort of bank apps on UPI.
So thanks for having me on this webinar, and happy to be in great company here to see the variances between Swedish and Indian market. Coming to your question, I think that's what they say. You're in a developing market, so it's always going to be highly competitive. But I think that's also what makes it exciting. I mean, personally for me, actually began my career in the US market in the Valley. And I actually wanted to work in an exciting market, which is why I decided to move back to India instead of trying to build, incrementally innovative products. So it's very exciting. And of course, it's the next big frontier after China. So we do see in the last couple of years, global brands have actually, jumped into the market as well, with Google trying its bit, and of course, WhatsApp trying to do its bit as well. But I think that the market by the Indian market is so huge. Even today, I think it's an untapped opportunity. And I think there is room for everyone to flourish. And I can tell you why I think so. So, while Kunal was mentioning, and we are also consumers of UPI services as well as bill payment services and NACH services of NPCI. So have huge respect for them. But while the numbers are stacking up fast in terms of growth, but we are also a population of 1.3 billion now. I mean, you can't compare that with any other nation in the world. And by contrast, Sweden is just way too small. So so the numbers look huge, but I think we ought to do actually 10x the numbers. So we ought to be doing trillions of digital transactions instead of billions, which is what we are doing currently. But I think we'll get there. And a lot of this has happened in the last, I would say a lot of growth has happened in the last 5 to 10 years, mostly in the last 5 years, because of smartphone prices going down in India and affordability of smartphones improving, and also data costs coming down significantly. Data used to be very expensive several years ago in India. So we are in a good place. And so coming to MobiKwik and how do we manage in this, this big democratic, society of India, I think that payments has a lot of different use cases, and different things are required. Different products and different players are focusing on them. So an example, there are some players who are focusing specifically only on P2P transactions, which is bank-to-bank transactions built on top of UPI. And then there are other players who are trying to become like a super app, where they want to sell everything from shoes to phones to bill payments to what have you. I think the unique positioning that my company MobiKwik has taken in the minds of the consumer is that we are firstly not aiming to become an e-commerce play at all. We are completely focused on being your financial go-to app. And by that, I'll tell you what I mean. So our power play has been in having the right mix of users and merchants. And so to that extent, while on one hand, we have about 120 million users, on the other side, we also have a very large merchant base. And these are all merchants that we have acquired directly, e-commerce merchants as well as physical stores, about 3 million merchants. And the proposition we bring to the users is that whether you are trying to get groceries, or whether you are trying to order food, or you're trying to make your bill payments, or you're trying to pay your school fees, all of these things you can do with your MobiKwik wallet. So all of these products and services are aggregated for you in one place, in one app. And this has been the thesis on which we've been growing MobiKwik for the last 10 years. An interesting point that I would like to bring about in the discussion, and also vis-a-vis the Indian dynamic, is that while India has a plethora of banks, we have about 900 million debit cards in India, which means that a debit card is associated with a bank account. So you can imagine that as many number of Indians have banks. But interestingly enough, there are only about 50 million credit cards in India. So the interesting point I want to focus on here is that credit card, which is very easily available and is the simplest credit tool used for purchasing and shopping in most economies of the world, is actually very, very underserved in India. So most Indians have a bank account, but they are underserved in terms of financial products, whether it is credit, investment products, insurance, what have you. All of these have less than 10% penetration rates. So insurance has 3% penetration rate, credit is 6% of India. And I think so that's sort of the larger aspiration that MobiKwik has been going after for the last 2 years, which is to say that the user is coming to my platform for payments, and now I have a lot of data on this user. Is there a way that I can also provide affordable and easily accessible, simple, sachet-sized financial products to these users? And to that extent, in the last 2 years, less than 2 years, we have given almost 2 million loans. And of course of smaller ticket size. So you can assume about $150 to 200 US dollars worth of loans. And this is an interesting aspect, which is to say that a user who does not have access to credit card and any other forms of formal credit, now with MobiKwik's digital credit foray, the credit is available in the wallet. And so whether I want to pay an advance for a house I want to rent, or whether I want to pay the annual fees for my kids' school, or I want to make a down payment on a motorcycle, I am able to do all of these now with my wallet, which is now backed by credit. And so these are some of the unique ways in which we are trying to bring disruption in the Indian market on top of the mobile payments platform that we've already built out.
That's very interesting, to bring financial services very easily available, adding to your sort of payment capability in your wallet. I think it's a great move. And let us introduce Joseph Hajj as well, because he's the chief strategist of Swish in Sweden. And Joseph, you also have to explain to particularly then the Indian audience why Swish has been such a great success in Sweden. We have you have 75% of the population of Sweden is sort of using Swish, sort of high usage numbers, but I know you're also working on strategies to possibly take this into the next level. So, but please just tell us a little bit about Swish, so we get a background for this webinar, please.
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks for inviting me to this webinar, and thanks to the Indian community as well. It's for us at least extremely impressive to see the scale at which you are operating this. I mean, in Europe, we are, I think, as large as all other mobile wallets combined, and so we perceive ourselves as large until we talk to players in India and to some extent in Africa as well. So extremely interesting to hear, the traction side and overall the way you built the service. But I think just briefly to introduce Swish to the rest of the participants. So Swish is a mobile payment system. We were launched back in 2012, and we are a strictly bank-led initiative and a strictly bank-led product. That means that we are owned by the 6 largest banks in Sweden, and then we have an additional 6 banks participating into the scheme. So Swish is the brand, the scheme, and the underlying technology of the payment. But in our case, banks are the ones taking the service to the market. As Joachim mentioned, it's actually 92% of Swedes between the ages of 18 and 65 use Swish, and 85% of Swedes between the ages of 18 and 65 did a Swish transaction last month. So also in terms of activity, we see quite high usage. Today, around 80% of all P2P payments are done through Swish. 2 million transactions a day, and 40% of our transactions today are on the P2M side, which is a space that we are growing, and that is a core strategic focus area for us. Coming back briefly to Rahul's point from before, I wouldn't agree that Swish is sort of restricting innovation in any way. I would argue the opposite. Swish is the payment, the means of payment, but we have a very clear platform philosophy with open APIs where other players in the community, the ecosystem, are free to build products and services and take to the market. And this is really key in our success as well. On the P2P side, the success has been having access and using banks themselves as the customer acquisition channel. So a year after launch, we had 1 million users, which is 10% of the population. And 3 years after launching, we had 5 million users, which is 50% of the population. So in relation to to India, it's not that impressive in terms of numbers of users, but in terms of penetration of the population, I've only been here 1 year and I'm still impressed by this. So on the P2P side, we've taken a quite dominant position. But then again, coming back to the point I made before, together with partners, together with the ecosystem, together with the fintech community in Sweden, this is how we build products and take to market for businesses to use, for governments to use, and so on. So that's been, I think, one of the key factors. I think another point to make is, and this is where I do see quite a lot of resemblance between what you guys are doing in India and what we are doing here. But I think one of the biggest one is we have a strong history here of fintech and payments. So we have the Klarnas, the Tinks, the Trustleys, the iSettle. So already top of mind, we have four unicorns, and you could argue the fifth. We do also see a lot of American companies from the Valley using Sweden as sort of a sandbox environment to test out new products and services. So the Swede is in general quite native in terms of digitalness. And as I think Anders pointed out before, we are below 1% in terms of cash in circulation in relation to GDP. And we were at 3%, below 3% when Swish launched. So Swish has been driving this further, but Sweden was already the cash Swish was introduced. So that's quite an interesting point of view as well. And to conclude, I think what we have done is, just for the Indian community to understand, is we only have one app. So there is one brand, one app called Swish. All banks participate in the scheme and offer the Swish app to their users and their merchants for that sake as well. But there is one common brand for all. And we see a number of different ways of doing this in Europe, at least. We have the Twint model in Switzerland, where you have the Twint. So it's but every bank has their version of it. So it's Twint by UBS, Twint by Credit Suisse, and so on. That has been quite successful. The other version where banks, I think that's sort of the UPI version, banks come together and build the underlying infrastructure that others can build services on. What they have done, this is the UK side, the Finnish side with Sirto and so on, but what they have done there is basically restrict access to these rails to banks. So that hasn't gained that much traction. And then we have the third alternative, the Bizums in Spain and Paylibs in France and such, where banks come together, build the infrastructure and the brand, but they put it into the bank apps. And we also see quite some limitations in terms of traction there. So we believe that one of the key success criteria for us, at least, has been this common app, one app for all, and one brand for all. Meaning, I know that if the user has Swish, or if the merchant accepts Swish, he will accept my payment. So there's one brand for all.
Thanks, Joseph, for a great introduction of Swish for the Indian community, and welcome into the webinar. I like to start to look at some of the potential technical problems that is potentially stopping growth of mobile payments because of the how fickle sometimes online connections can be. I know we have that problem in India. There are areas we don't even have online connectivity, and also it could be fickle even in your bigger cities. But also, you know, Joseph, sometimes Swish goes down, and with only one app in Sweden, then the entire sort of no one can pay with Swish all of a sudden in an old market. In India, I think you may be on several bank apps or several payment apps, so you can come around that problem. But all that, these sort of digital problems is, I guess, creating something which makes the whole proposition of digital payments a bit frail. And I like to introduce sort of my colleague here, Paul Cronholm, and discussing a little bit on these sort of potential connectivity problems that I know we've been working on. As how do you see ways to address those internet connectivity problems, or connectivity problem with the payment service. So, Paul, over to you.
Yeah. So, hello. My name is Paul. I'm just introducing me a little bit. I'm the CTO at Crunchfish. So we basically build software and products for mobile interaction. And one key factor that we have identified, just like you point out, is the robustness of these mobile payment systems. They normally work, but I think we all have been in a time when they lack connectivity or the service is down, as you have mentioned here. And we basically can solve that. So we have basically done a proxy solution where you can actually do a mobile transaction even if you have lacking internet access or the service is down. So I absolutely believe that we can address those problems and make it possible to pay at any time, basically. Yes.
And I think sort of as I mentioned, Josef, sort of in Sweden we have become sort of a society with only sort of now 10% cash transactions roughly, and I know India is striving to go from what is it, 80-85% cash transaction. Cash is king, as Rahul said, but I know it makes the society vulnerable. For basically that many shops don't accept cash even anymore. We can have it for you, Joseph, but for the whole crowd here, you know, this is where India is heading, for more a society with less cash. Sweden is there already, but could you see the problem that potentially could create?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's highly relevant. We just had a meeting with the central bank last Friday on this very topic, and I think at the end of the day, what we can do as Swish is foster, you know, inclusiveness and make sure that everyone can use Swish. But what we do recognize this problem as well. But at the end of the day, this is a dialogue we will need to have with the central bank in Sweden, and we do have that dialogue. So this is a quite big risk actually in Sweden that the central bank has recognized. I
think we lost you a little bit. Joseph, can you? I think you might be on now. Could you? I think we lost you when you said this is quite a big risk that the Swedish central bank has recognized.
Yes, correct. And apologies for my connection here. Speaking of being unconnected while doing payments, well, yeah. So what the Swedish central bank has engaged in is launching a digital currency called Cronholm. So this is one of their projects to sort of face. We were talking about, you know, like a contingency plan where natural disasters and sort of war can be won, but there is also a risk of just not issuing central bank money and relying too much on commercially issued money from banks. And at least the second version of this is what they are hoping to attack with this e-krona project. So it's a digital currency that we as Swish are following closely, obviously, to see how we can interact, how we can facilitate that, and make sure that, you know, we can be the enabler there. And as part of that as well, obviously the central bank has recognized, and I think to some extent accepted, the fact that physical cash, it's just a fact right now that people don't use it, that people are not interested in using it. So how can they build contingency planning around supporting a cashless society in the case of emergency, war, natural disaster, and so on? But I think
is it also for just that the services can go down? Could you because that's sort of big risks that you know, or big events that is a war. You know, we haven't been in war since 1809 in Sweden, so that doesn't happen too often. But I guess there is a risk also for simply bank ID, the way we authenticate our payments, or even Swish goes down, or it could be the mobile network goes down, or it could be a lot of things that happens. There must be a contingency for that as well, I guess.
Absolutely, and in those cases, there you could argue that it's our responsibility to make sure that our system is robust enough to handle that. I think we are relying today on a number of partners in the ecosystem, Bank ID being one, so the national identification service in Sweden, banks being another, the local, the domestic clearing and settlement platform, and so on. So in this particular case, it's our responsibility to make sure that our system is robust enough to have a stable uptime, and this is what the team is working heavily on. And without mentioning exactly, we are above the 99.9% uptime. So we believe that there is a quite robust system,
But how, if we move to Kunal for MPCI, you are driving hard to get us into, and Upasana was talking about we should be 10 times higher. We should be in the trillions and having much less cash transactions. But you have a market like Sweden where we sort of, we get done away with our cash. But that creates problems on the other hand. Have you started preparing for some of the risks that could happen with being a cashless society? I know you're very far from it right now, but what's your thinking in moving in that direction? Do you see the risks that could come about?
I think taking on the challenge that Upasana posed, I think it's very clear for us. I think this number has to be big. So I think while we do 1 billion transactions a month on UPI, I think we're preparing to possibly do 1 billion transactions a day. And like she said, 1 billion is a small number to look at. Possibly 1 trillion is where it will do justice given the scale of the country. I think while solving for the problem, Joachim, that you just mentioned, I think the way we look at it, India isn't a homogeneous market. And I think when we divide this market, when we're serving this or preparing the retail payments for the country, we divide these markets into very clear 3 buckets. I'll take an example of how we're possibly dividing this market. The market for us, there is a certain segment of the customers which we imagine is similar to what Europe is. I correlate that with people having smartphone and connectivity all the time. There's a second segment which possibly sits into the segment which is like Brazil or Indonesia, where there's a huge population with mobile connectivity, but possibly feature phones, not smartphones. Then there's a large base of customers, which is like Africa, which possibly isn't without even a mobile connectivity. They're possibly only available form factor for doing any kind of payment is biometric. So we divide the country into these 3 buckets very clearly. The top bucket has been growing for us in the last 5 years from 230 million smartphones to almost 420 million smartphones now. And for that segment, we have products like UPI, we have products like Beam, Bharat Bill Pay, NETC. There's the second layer of the segment which is connected only through feature phones. We have products like Star 99 Hash, which works on USSD as a platform. RuPay as a product card form factor is available for that segment. And for the bottom layer, which does not have any connectivity through a mobile phone or a mobile connectivity, then there's products like biometric payments, Bharat Bill Pay, NFS. Those are products. So what we've clearly segmented is if you were to digitalize, and that's a broader definition of mobile payments rather than just restricting it to mobile payments. The broader definition of mobile payments is if a customer has a certain form factor for payment, we will leverage that. Now, for each one of them, obviously, you need connectivity at one end at least. Like on the mobile side, you need connectivity on both sides. For doing even an Aadhaar transaction, you need at least connectivity on the merchant side. While the consumer might use as biometric, but the merchant still needs to have connectivity there. And I think I would say when I look at the infrastructure growth, I think in the first pyramid, I think connectivity is phenomenally there. I think with 2G, 3G, 4G, all the technologies being available to that customer, that connectivity isn't a big challenge, at least in the metros and the big towns. In pockets, yes, there are challenges. There could be a challenge in terms of making connections and making a payment. In the middle layer, it's more about solutioning various kind of technologies there. And the bottom of the pyramid, I think it's really about consumer awareness, where how the biometric payments could be used while the merchant takes care of the institute of the activity very clearly. So we've segmented our customers, well, there are products available for each segment, and possibly we're solving for our technology connectivity problem that we face.
Okay. Upasana, are you addressing all these three segments with MobiKwik, or are you said you had a very select sort of user base as well as select merchant base? Are you going for the smartphone users, sort of the category 1 here, and ignoring the rest, or are they part of your strategy for financially including them into MobiKwik family?
Yeah, so, we've had this question, in our mind several times over the course of our 10-year journey. And, what we've decided is that the first aspirational product that any Indian wants to buy, their personal computing gadget, is their smartphone. And so, while India has reached the 450 million smartphone number, in fact, the number of smartphones is slightly higher than that. However, the data connections are also pegged around that. We believe that over the course of the next 5 years, 80% will migrate to smartphones, because in India today, you can buy a smartphone for even as low as $100, in fact as low as $50, if I'm not mistaken. So we do believe that India is eventually going to migrate to smartphones. So MobiKwik as a platform has some concept of I would say transient connectivity, but most of the products only work using a smartphone. So to that extent, our focus in terms of acquiring users as well as merchants, is limited to the fact specifically users are smartphone enabled. Merchants may or may not have a smartphone, because it is possible for us to give them a QR code, and if a user walks in with a smartphone and scans the QR code, the payment can still be completed, and the merchant gets to know that he has received the payment by virtue of receiving a text message on their mobile phone, which may not be a smartphone. So I think on the merchant end, we've made it flexible, but on the consumer end, yes, while at some point we used to have solutions catering to different user bases, I think our focus is on the middle classes of India, and we do believe that even somebody who makes as low as 25,000 rupees in monthly salary, Indian rupees, is able to afford this 3,000 rupee, 4,000 rupee smartphone that I spoke about. Okay.
Yeah. How about the connectivity then for on the customer side? Because sometimes you are on a certain network, and you come to a merchant which might have its connectivity, but the customer doesn't have it. Do you see that as a problem, that these?
Thanks for asking me that. So that, I think, is a very big opportunity, and I can tell you that in terms of my company and our technology team, specifically our Android team focuses a lot on ensuring that we are able to deliver on very slow speeds, as in, not even 2G, but edge connections or even slower connections sometimes. And, this has been something we focused on early on. Right now, as the quality of smartphones and the connectivity in data has improved, we have also sort of allowed that to be to work on faster connections. But there was a time, I want to say, even as far back as 2 years ago, our entire app was just a couple of MB, like less than 2 MB, and it was for a reason, because we wanted to ensure that anyone who wanted to download the app was able to download it. And also, we appreciate that most of the cheaper smartphones in the market have very different constraints from a processing and a memory point of view, as compared to the high-end Android and iOS phones that all of us and our audiences on this webinar are using. So a lot of focus in ensuring that the product works very seamlessly on cheaper processing devices, as well as on very poor bandwidth.
Okay.
And I want to say that one company that I think has done phenomenally on this, and this is just my personal belief, is WhatsApp. I mean, I don't know what they do, but prior to the COVID days, I can tell you, if you get off a plane let's say you're going for some business travel, you get off the plane and you switch on your phone. The first app that starts getting the connectivity and starts getting the data has been WhatsApp. We are very much, we are very inspired by that and proactively work towards ensuring that we are also able to work on very poor speeds.
And I guess you're gonna see WhatsApp as a means of payment right now coming into the Indian markets. I don't know if you want to comment on that. I don't know, Kunal, WhatsApp as a means of payment entering into the Indian market. That's a reality already now, isn't it? Do you have any comments to that? Would that be a big threat to companies like MobiKwik and others, really? How do you see them entering into the market?
Joachim, the market is open for everyone. I think there are players, small and big, even right now. I think it exists. I think there are banks. There are many third-party players within the marketplace. I think I would say, I think the success of UPI sits on the customer acceptance and the customer experience. I think anybody who delivers a great customer experience, customers will move towards that very clearly. And I would believe that while the big players will exist in the marketplace, I think there are players who will be serving us a niche customer with their specific use case is where the customer would want to use them. So if you ask me, I think when customers' problem is getting solved is going to be the moment of truth. Okay.
And you, Upasana, since I did put you on the spot there with you brought up WhatsApp, but how do you see them coming into the market, and are they a threat to your business model, or you see yourself as having your niche, really, how you are competing in the markets, still thriving with that? How do you view the entrance of WhatsApp with their great data connectivity facility?
No, I think that firstly, I'm sorry, didn't mean to ruffle any feathers by bringing up WhatsApp a couple of times. No personal or business affiliation with them, just a personal fan of the product offering, specifically in India and Brazil and upcoming markets. So no, I think that overall, I think it will be a positive in the ecosystem, just like Google Pay has been an amazing thing in the Indian market. I think that it will also bring more adoption, because remember, put together, we still don't have 1 billion Indians using mobile payments. So I think firstly, large global brands with the large user bases in India enabling payments is only going to bring more user adoption. And I think on that, I would like to agree with Kunal's point that while these players will leverage the open APIs of UPI and will bring faster user adoption. But then again, that user adoption is for one use case of a P2P or a P2M experience where the merchant has also enabled UPI. And as we previously discussed, I think there is a lot more in terms of giving a holistic payments package to the user, that this is an app that will service you across all your payment needs. And then specifically from MobiKwik's point of view, no, I do not see them as competition, just like I don't see many of the other players as competition as well. Because one thing you can be certain of with some of these large global players taking an interest in Indian market is that they are here to mostly understand the user profile and the user data. And the Indian market also heavily regulated. So while UPI is the only open API that they can serve the Indian user with, getting into discrete products like storing of value via wallet or offering financial products of any nature requires a slew of different licenses, which I'm not sure these global conglomerates would want to do, because it would require significant investments from them in the country from a licensing point of view. So therefore, I do not see them as competition. I do see that a general layer of payments adoption and service reaching many more people will happen via their platforms, but eventually the larger use cases or the larger value propositions that niche players or existing players will be able to offer the more users latch onto their platforms.
Yeah, and I guess if you, as you were saying, you want to tenfold, so 10 times increase in payments. Sort of the competition is cash. It's not other payment services, I guess, sort of, yeah. Anna, I believe you have a question from the audience that let's see what you want to bring into to the table here.
Yes, exactly. I think this touches actually really well on the discussion of platforms as such, as we seen in. So here's actually a question from the audience to Joseph at Swish. Do you see any opportunity for interoperable systems like UPI existing across Europe, you would say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've already started going down that path where we founded an association called the European Mobile Payment System Association in August last year, where we came together with the 7 largest wallets in Europe, and now we are 11. In total, 60 million users using these services. But we came together with these wallets in one association and one purpose, and that purpose is fostering mobile payments within Europe. And as such, our key kind of success criteria has been interoperability across these wallets. And we've come quite far. We can hopefully disclose more soon. But the overall ambition is really to reach this, interoperable state within Europe, where we don't see necessarily, a new Alipay or a PayPal in Europe, but rather, these local or regional winners all being interoperable and being able to communicate with each other. So local brands, but global reach, basically. So that is definitely something we see, because I think even if the brand can be local, and the user still expects, if you want to reach a proper ubiquitous service, you need to be able to do cross-border payments. So this is something we recognize, and I think within EMSA we have a really, really strong foundation with these 11 wallets, and I think we're 400 banks behind this as well, supporting this initiative.
If I turn to you, Kunal, because I know UPI, you have plans to take UPI on export. I know you have. You are in Singapore. You are in UAE, I think, or I don't know if it's just piloting or if it's been launched. So and in India itself, there are 120 local apps in a way that are operating, different apps really. How do you see sort of UPI possibly playing into the initiative of EMSA that Josef is talking about here in Swish, that they are doing in Europe?
First, I want to extend this platform conversation to Joseph. I think we can have a chat separately on UPI, and I think there are a lot of synergies. I was reading through the platforms, and I think what work that's already happening there. From our perspective, I think we're open to this conversation in terms of extending UPI to many other markets. I think we've already started doing the back-end work in terms of ground-level executions for some markets. The approach and the strategy that we're following is we're going behind the Indian diaspora first. I think whichever countries has a substantial amount of Indian diaspora, we're going behind that, fixing connectivity for them. There are Indians traveling to these countries or staying there, or there is a need for a remittance or a payment. I think we're reaching out to that audience first, but that's point number one. There are markets where we're finding commonalities in terms of the customer profile, in terms of the technology readiness being there. So that's the second rung of markets that we're going behind. So very clearly, there are markets like Singapore, there is UK, there is Middle East. So there are conversations which have already started. There are mature conversations. Some of them are already in the public domain. So the strategy is to very clearly, yes, I think export the unique thing that we've developed, which is the UPI and the UPI ID, the concept. Our technology scalability very clearly is the way the architecture of UPI is developed allows for this to be executed very fast.
Great, and thanks for that question from the audience. Really, we had it actually later on to talk about internationalization, so it was good that it already came up. I know I'm looking at the time. We started a little bit late, so I guess we have a few more minutes. And the corona has affected the whole world, as you all know, and it's Sweden. I don't know if you're aware in India, but we've been relatively open in our country. India's gone for a complete lockdown, but I'll turn to you, Josef, who's been following the stats in Sweden whilst we're having Corona. What do you see? What are the trends you see? Because clearly this is affecting also mobile payments in some interesting ways. What's your comment on that, Josef?
No, absolutely, and I think we can see this from two angles basically. One is the kind of the P2P side, and one is the P2M side. So as I mentioned before, our take up from the user side is already quite high. But what we have seen since the Corona crisis is people who are over the age of 65 are starting to adopt Swish in a significantly higher manner. So transactions made by people over the age of 65 has increased by 50% since the Corona crisis. So that's one. People who have still been using cash are less likely to use cash, and they are looking for alternative ways of doing this. So the elder population has adopted Swish to a significantly higher extent than they had before. That's one. Two, we see on the P2M side, merchants starting to adopt the thought of having mobile payments at scale, Swish specifically, in their stores. So, we haven't seen the big uptake yet, but this is because, as you know, we have a bit of integration times, sales times, and sales cycle, and so on. But at least from our side, we see this specific use case that we can offer that other payment options in general, but other mobile wallets cannot offer. That is the strictly proper contactless payment. So even if you have an Apple Pay device, you're still you're touching the pin pad terminal, right? You don't have to do that with Swish. You're authenticating yourself in the app, which means that you at no point need to be in contact with the terminal. So this is a big opportunity we see, and this is how we are positioning it as well to the large retailers in physical stores. On the e-com side, we already have 8% market share after only 2 years being in that space. So we haven't seen big increase there, but I think in particular on the large retailers, we see quite large interest, and the sales cycles have come quite far in a lot of the big ones. So yeah, we think in general we will come out stronger from this than when we came in. Definitely.
Yeah, no, and that's my feeling as well. Yeah, the pure contactless, when it's 100% contactless, as you say. I don't know if is that the feeling as well in India, that Upasana, this will actually be really good for you, that people would like to pay 100% contactless, authorizing with their own phone, not touching any public things. Is this maybe what really will drive now mobile payments to this tenfold increase that you are looking forward to?
Definitely. I mean, I expected to have a amazing catalytic impact, and not just us, most people in the ecosystem are also thinking that this is like a demonetization too for India, and exactly for the same reason that you mentioned. I can tell you from an example that I live in a gated complex of apartments, and there's a grocery store there, and he accepts cash, cards, as well as payments via UPI. And most people are bringing their own smartphones, scanning the QR code and paying, because you don't need to touch anything at the grocery store if you want to make this contactless payment. And I think that this will have an amazing impact, like Josef said. Coming out of this, we will also see more people adopting digital payments for daily life. And I think travel will also see similar impact in terms of how people travel. What I can tell you is that because of the absolute lockdown mode that we've gone in, I think that overall numbers are somewhat down, anywhere in the range of 20 to 40% for different players. But we do expect that the economy is now sort of opening up. June has been the first month that we are opening up, but our larger cities like Mumbai and Delhi are still seeing high growth in cases. So we do expect that in the next couple of months, we'll be able to get to pre-COVID numbers, and then eventually the number of people transacting digitally should have an overall, impact for the greater good in the future.
Yeah.
I can add, Joachim, a reference to some other European countries. So in the association that we have founded, EMSA, we are in close dialogue as you can expect. And we can take Twint as one example, the Swiss equivalent of Swish. So in Switzerland, that's a really cash-heavy country. And during this Corona crisis, Twint, being the leading mobile wallet, also bank-led, has increased their customer acquisition rate with 2 and up to 3x. So this is also, even in Europe, like these services are enabling this leapfrogging over cards to some extent, and they are really picking up their speed here, both in terms of number of transactions and activity, but also on the user side. So people have been refraining from the thought of using mobile payment, are now much more accepting the thought of using it in their everyday lives.
And I guess sort of to conclude here, Kunal, that must be music to your ears. You know, the Swiss market being a cash market, moving 2 times, you know, exploding now with mobile payments is sort of that's the dream scenario, isn't it? That's what you want to see. You're going to get something good out of Corona, even if it's been terrible for all of us in the whole world, really. Would you agree that is something that you could possibly expect here as a consequence?
I think, what's happening is actually this pandemic has really changed how we live, interact, and spend our daily lives, obviously, and it should have an impact on payments very clearly. I think what we're sensing is, like Upasana mentioned, I think what demonetization did for us was, I think, break the fear of technology for people. I think it's really pushed people to adopt digital payments. But what this pandemic is doing and this lockdown is doing is it's actually fueling the need. So if you really ask me, I think while all of us got locked down and I think we were at home, the consumer's need of making payments, like the example she shared, is really pushing the digital payments engine right now. I think while yes, there are many digital payments which are not yet reverted back to their normal numbers, UPI is back to the normal numbers. So I think within this current scenario, so I think that clearly is a signal to that yes, consumers want to adopt digital payments. I think it's very clearly in the space of, I think digital payments were easy and instant. This pandemic has added the word safety to it. Safety from the perspective of hygiene very clearly. So I think that's a big plus, and I think that suddenly has raised awareness to a big level. I think a lot of ecosystem players here come together. I think we created a ecosystem campaign around UPI, which was called UPI Chalega, and the Pay Safe campaign, which allowed customers to be aware of why digital payments is safe. You know, whether it was making payments for grocery, whether it was paying salaries to your staff. So I think for all these use cases, I think digital payments really stood up to the hour, and therefore, I think in the need of the hour, I think digital payments is here to stay. And I think we're ready to take those volumes. We've beefed up infrastructure to even cater to those volumes. So yeah, we're ready to serve that space well.
Great. I know time is running out. I think it's been interesting. This has been our first webinar. Thank you so much for being guinea pigs of allowing yourself to be part of this one. I think you all did a fantastic job. Highlighting some of the differences, highlighting some of the strategies and thinking in your respective markets. I think I'm really happy that you all came about to this webinar. We are planning another webinar sort of in after the summer holidays here, and that will be more around this with digital currency that Josef, you brought up. We want to talk about that some more. And it will be interesting to sort of have an Indian perspective on that as well. Sweden is running their pilot project together with the National Bank, and I think it will be interesting to look at that from an international perspective. What is happening with digital currency? So that's probably we are planning together with Business Sweden that as a follow-up sort of webinar. But given that times is definitely up for us, I really want to thank you all. Thank you so much for participating. We will put this webinar. We have recorded it, and we want to put it out as soon as we can on just a link. We will do that for everybody, so you can see it afterwards. And there has been some questions that we haven't been able to, that we haven't covered. So we will try to also answer some of them in some after script after this meeting. But with that said, I don't know if there are any final words from any of the panelists. Anyone want to say anything? Rahul?
I can conclude. I think so. We started with cash as king, and we're ending with consumer as king. I think that's the elephant in the room which we have to address, because we have to learn from our mistakes, which at least India, which did in credit card, because it didn't take up, and digital has a great chance to fix those issues, because even though we touched upon the internet and vulnerability issues, even though it's not meant, some of them will be real, some of them will be perceived, but the onus is on us, at least from the players, to ensure that the consumer understand the safety and safety of a transaction. So bridging those is more part of the ecosystem rather than leaving to consumer. And you can never know what consumer can surprise us. They can easily disrupt the whole market with mobile payments, or they can revert back to cash. So we have to be cognizant of both the scenarios.
Yes.
Leave it at that.
Thanks, Rahul. All right. With that, I'd like to thank you all again, and I hope to continue some of the dialogue sort of offline with some of you to take this sort of forward into the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, everyone.
Yeah, stay healthy. Okay, take care. Cheers.
Bye-bye.